Another really cool part of the show, we kept talking about having guests on, and Ethan happened to be in the neighborhood this week, so it's really great to have probably one of the more preeminent experienced crypto CISOs out there, just in terms of the things that you've seen and done in an industry that is maturing. There's probably, what, 5 of you on the planet that have kind of had the breadth of experience, maybe a few more than that.
A little more, but yeah.
And I know there's a lot of you've worked at banks, you've worked at crypto specific companies, you've worked in funds, like you've kind of got to see what everybody, what a lot of the financial institutions are doing with crypto. And so I think the right way to set you up, per your suggestion, was this John Oliver clip of like, let's talk about what crypto really is.
FTX, a crypto trading platform. In theory, they were supposed to be our next dollar, our next Bank of America, and our next stock exchange. But in reality, they are fiascos. And before we start, we're not going to be discussing the merits or the technology of the blockchain. We did that 5 years ago. It's still on the internet. You can go watch it there or not. Not watching this show is always a strong option for you. But just as a reminder, every single crypto coin is just something someone with a laptop made up. That is true for all of them, like Dogecoin, Catcoin, Panda Coin, Furry Coin, Cum Rocket, Elon Sperm, and Monkey Jizz. Those are all real, by the way. We were going to come up with a fake one as a joke, but then we saw Monkey Jizz, and it felt like a hat on a hat.
Okay, so at the end of this, man, like this is where the Homer Simpson fits in. Like, the internet, is that thing still around? You got to play that. So Ethan, man, like with that setup, like, tell us about what your experience has been in the crypto world.
Sure. So I've been floating around at some different places there for about 5 years now, which, in crypto years is a lot of time.
Yeah.
I jumped over in 2018, but before, Bitcoin was going on its big run to 60,000. Before, there was a lot of the VC investment.
Yeah.
It was kind of in the infancy of this time.
Your first gig was at a bank, right?
Actually, at a software company.
A software company, okay. Yeah.
They were working on their own distributed ledger language.
Okay.
So that was an interesting gig, and then went from there to an actual fund that tried to turn into like every kind of business related to crypto you could create.
Yeah.
From trading to even doing staking to mining to investment banking related to it. It was the entire run the entire thing and just push on it.
Right.
And so it's been an interesting experience. You've got things like the origins of it, where it was thought of as a joke and it was worth almost nothing. With Bitcoin launching in 2009.
Yeah.
Silk Road and all that illegal stuff that was going on with it.
Yeah.
Which we already started to talk about it, but it's that thing of before it's heavily regulated or before folks know how to react to it, it's the great vehicle to do all kinds of horrible things.
Right.
The underlying blockchain technology, though, and what you're able to do with it, it's pretty powerful, and it's still sort of the infancy of it. When you think about how long it really takes for tech change to happen, places are still running those Fortune 100 companies. They're still running mainframes.
Yeah.
Blockchain comes along just because it's a good idea or you could do something with it. It doesn't mean you're going to throw out the mainframe. It takes just years or almost generations of maturation to be able to actually move to that stuff.
Right.
And so it's one of those things. You're seeing cryptocurrencies is one of those like first big uses here. There's a lot of other ones. The kind of fun one that I always like to mention to folks is, you go to buy a house. Right now you buy title insurance.
Yeah.
Because those records are so god-awful.
Yeah.
You have to get insurance because someone might not have looked up the paper records correctly.
Right.
That seems like the great kind of thing. It's public records anyway. Digitize it.
Yeah.
And it's one of those, I'm sure eventually over time that sort of stuff will happen.
Any ultra high integrity, kind of opportunity could be digitized and blockchain managed. Totally.
Yeah, and you're massively reproducing that on a distributed scale, so that way you don't really ever lose the data unless the entire ecosystem fails.
Isn't that like, I was watching this funny like cartoon YouTube video about crypto, and like, isn't that what banks both fear and why they're trying to get into it? Is like, what do you need the brick and mortar bank for anymore if I can facilitate currency transaction and financial transaction purchases all in an automated way through a distributed ledger that is super high integrity? Like, what does the bank do?
Yeah, that's another interesting side of it. And part of that is actually the trust side. Do you want to trust that ecosystem or do you want to trust the bank?
Right.
Which has its trade-offs in both directions.
Right.
Because, when you think about 2009, that was right after the big financial crisis where the banks, the financial industry, they screwed up.
Yeah.
They totally ignored, underlying exposures, the CDOs, the derivative swaps, that sort of world.
How would crypto help with that? I don't think it would have, though. I think that this is just like again, a way to facilitate high integrity transaction. What would have changed in crypto that would have kept, the Silicon Valley Bank from going under? If all their money was in crypto, would that have changed anything? It was a run because everybody was pulling their money out, right? Because of risk.
So you know that what's that term? Fractional. I forget what it is. It's what banks do, where they only actually hold a fraction of what you're actually putting in.
Yeah.
That sort of thing. That's that whole world and that ecosystem, and folks do leverage things with money.
Yeah.
And with your crypto, if you actually have the keys and you have your crypto, no one else can do that.
Yeah.
No one else can say they ran out of it, that they froze it, that they use it for something else. And so it gives you this, uber control over what's going on, that, it takes away that ability for someone else to accidentally, do something silly with it.
Well, we were riffing about that a few minutes ago in the break of we've worked for billionaires, and very interestingly, I was trolling some Facebook video or something, and it talked about the 4 or 5 crypto billionaires that have recently popped up and setting up Panda Coin or whatever, and they're going missing, right? They're dying, and we talked about the Quadriga CX. Thank you. And if you watch the story about that on Netflix, and it looks like at least they're alluding to the founder and his ex-wife were colluding, and it all comes down to no billionaire has access to all of their money in the form of 3 little digital certificates that they can carry around on their laptop. Right? They have houses and diversification and art and boats and research stuff and all of that, and these guys are walking around with a thing in their wallet worth $12 billion.
Yes. So one of the ways to think of it also, unlike the traditional finance world, we got rid of a lot of the speed bumps.
Yeah.
They can't just go freeze your assets.
Yeah.
I mean, there's a whole world of on-ramps and off-ramps with exchanges and centralized, and, law enforcement getting involved there. We could talk about that part a little later. Mm-hmm. But ultimately, if you're doing self-custodying of your coin, you have your keys. No one can stop you from transferring it to someone else.
Right.
And
forced or not,
you're totally in control. Versus, I don't know if you guys have had this happen, but just working in broader finance and job hopping here or there, I've had a brokerage account and a checking account associated with it totally frozen.
Yeah.
And I got a snail mail letter to find that out.
Yeah.
And I kind of looked at that and said, what is this? It's
right.
not even in the spirit of stopping me from trading.
Yeah.
It's my checking account.
Yeah.
And so when you think about crypto and, people seeing that whole system fail and literally losing homes, losing their livelihood, that sort of thing, it does present an alternative that does have some pros.
Yeah.
Not all pros, there's cons too, but it's different and it gives you some other avenues.
Taylor, this brings us back to me anyway of, our last show we talked about AI, and we used the AI dilemma talk, and that is from the Center for Ethics and Technology.
Yep.
Where is the equivalent in Center for Ethics in digital finance? Because what you're describing is where are we going to put guardrails and how we're going to manage crypto in a way so this kind of dumb shit doesn't happen, right? Where is that regulatory body, or at least influence body?
So if you're following the news, that's one of the big hot topics that, it's that American way of, it's good until you screwed it up.
That's
and then
right.
we're going to come and tell you what you did wrong.
That's right.
And there's not enough regulation. And there's been this ongoing push about, we want proper regulation.
Yeah.
The more there are clear cut, do these things, these are the edicts, these are the rules, places can actually follow them and build on top of that, because folks want to do more creative. It's financial folks. They want to do more creative things. They want to build derivatives on top of stuff.
They want to make money.
They want to leverage things. They want to do all kinds of stuff. But if they're not even sure if it's legal, they don't want to do even more with it.
Right.
Or they do and it gets more dangerous. And that's some of the things we saw with some of these crashes.
Yeah.
The tide goes out, and that classic quote, you see who's swimming naked.
Well, let me, before I get you into the security part of this, I guess I got to ask the question, crypto, is this a thing, or is this going to sunset in 5 years? It was a fun social experiment. Where's it going? What do you see?
Me personally, I think there's going to be some avenues where it's going to disrupt, and it's not going to be the same things.
It's not what we think it's going to be.
It's not what's been happening. It's going to be those core capabilities to move funds faster or cheaper. Banks still struggle with that. The SWIFT system, all that world. It's good. It's maybe it's great, but it's not perfect.
Right.
And so this gives you another alternative system that is also good.
It's faster, higher security. I mean,
it gives you other
the hackers that
properties.
got into Swift 10 years ago because that thing hasn't been renovated in 20 years or whatever. So
it took away some of those abilities. With Swift, you could do the cancels or the stops or whatever. So you stop a transaction from going through, and it's a network where it's these banks that all partner. So even if something goes across, if you actually thought it was fraudulent, you could go tell them, and you had a decent chance of getting it frozen.
Right.
Crypto, with the advent of centralized exchanges, you also have some of that capability still. But do those even run out of the U.S.? How much power do you have over those? So it's just different, and there's lots of peer-to-peer that can happen.
So silly coins and all the stuff that John Oliver's making fun of. Probably that exchanges will probably happen because you have to have exchanges. They'll probably flourish. That's probably where the guardrails will start to evolve. But the real core competency of where all this leads is back to the blockchain technology and the high integrity transaction capabilities it provides. Is that kind of what you're saying?
Yeah, and there's lots of other uses of it. Blockchain is just a data structure.
Yeah.
The more you can do cool, smart things on top of it, the better. And there's all kinds of, things that haven't built up or haven't moved as quickly. And part of that is the things involving money just evolve fastest.
Yeah. All right. So E, like with all the ambiguity we just talked through, of like where the crypto roads lead and like these opportunities you're describing, that's obviously. Our listeners are like, all right, so what businesses can I go invest in that sound like that and whatnot? I'm sure that's what everybody wants to know from you, given how much money that's been made and lost in crypto. This is the Unapologetic Security Podcast. Yes. So as like I think of, like we mentioned in your intro, there's probably 5 to 10 people like you on the planet that have worked very intimately in various domains of businesses that are embracing crypto. What's it like to be a crypto leader or a security leader in a crypto company? And like, what is the nuance or differentiation of things you focus on versus a more traditional fintech, tech, or other commodity business institution? Why is it? What's different about crypto?
So the first thing is everything you have to worry about elsewhere at traditional finance and other kinds of companies. That's all there already.
Right.
It's just amplified with what you have to worry about attacking it. And then you have an entire ecosystem where you have to understand what's happening at different levels with crypto world. And it's not necessarily at every crypto company, because if a company is not, working on their own smart contracts, they're not creating their own coins, that sort of thing, then you care about understanding that world, but you don't need to understand, all the different attacks that can happen on that specifically.
I see.
If you're taking commodity Bitcoin, then, there are smart contracts. You care about that they're working. But, those have been hardened for, well over a decade.
Yeah.
You're creating your own different sort of ecosystem. And you've got, what actually goes on chain. It's evolved. Bitcoin it was kind of like the more simple chain at first. You could use it to hold and exchange, just the currency. Ethereum came along and it was a more full-fledged platform. And that's what led to a lot of the creating your own coins on top of it. And so you would, spend Ethereum, spend ETH to go actually create your own coin on top of it to, publish your own smart contracts to create your own ecosystems.
Right.
And that built into things like the DAOs, the decentralized autonomous organizations, where you've got voting power and control over what's going on, as part of what's on chain and contract.
Wow.
And so it's, what you're writing as code really matters. You've got the entire AppSec world on top of that, reentrancy attacks. If you can make that happen, make that work successfully, you might be able to unload an entire system or ecosystem.
Yeah.
And then you've got, just the blockchain world in general. You've got a lot of nodes that are working together. There's different attack patterns and different kinds of threats for, how does that peer-to-peer system work? How is it protected?
Yeah.
When you're trying to submit transactions, they go into this thing called the mempool. It's not immediately published. You've got this whole world of either like mining or staking. It's the consensus protocols and how you actually figure out what's actually happening going into it.
Yeah.
And there's attack patterns that evolve in all these areas. And that whole world of InfoSec professionals, it whittles down to way fewer people. And it's a novel area.
Yeah.
So it's that fun challenge of, what can go wrong, knowing that you can't even predict all of it. And trying to just partially voraciously read and understand, what do I even need to worry about?
Is there any kind of best practice framework or anything that you anchor to, or like, did you write, or like,
so
how do you know how to do your job and figuring it? You sound like you're figuring it all out on the road.
So some of it is talking to friends, making friends, and reaching out and pushing. Part of it is also there's an entire world of an ecosystem of news articles, knowledge about crypto and that sort of thing that's evolved and built out.
Yeah.
And they're also having some organizations. One I can think of is the Cryptocurrency Consortium. They actually came up with a framework where they go into detail. They have different levels of maturity of what it would mean, and they talk in detail about what's going on. They've turned that into a formal audit certification for being a cryptocurrency auditor. There's training that's out there also. At one point, when I was pivoting from protecting an overall organization to a job where I was very dedicated just to architecture, I spent a bunch of time looking at the free open courseware from MIT, where they were bringing in some of the experts and literally talking and doing lectures for hours and hours, like grad level, content about how this all is designed, how it works, what it means. And, a lot of folks that are listening to that, they're trying to learn very specific areas of like, how does it work or how do I design this stuff? I'm listening for those little nuggets of here's what you need to worry about. At one point he goes on a tangent about quantum readiness. Okay, I want to hear this.
Yeah.
Is that part of CSAIL? Like their computer science and AI program?
I think just the open courseware stuff that they've got. And then it was one of those grad level things, so I don't know if it was a temporary or permanent one, but they brought in some, industry folks that, have been involved in this stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's another side of it that I don't know how much you guys have gotten close to it, but there's a large population that's gotten involved in crypto security that actually comes out of that, that Unit 8200.
Oh, yeah.
The Israeli Special Forces that were dedicated to that area.
Yeah.
Some of those folks have jumped on that, and that's been their area that they've been dedicated to. One of the biggest, vendors in the space is, founded by folks that came from there.
Oh, I see. Okay. So the 8200 is becoming kind of the security workforce for outsourcing security in crypto companies. You use them?
They've got involved in it. I've used the products of some of those folks.
Yeah.
I mean, the really big one in the space is Fireblocks. And, not that Michael's going to say he's good friends with me, but I'm sure he probably remembers me at this point.
Well, I was going to ask you like another question of like, how do you deal with the vendor space being like, you're not only that there's vendors that you engage with that do certain transactional processing functions and things like that. How do you get comfortable with them with the level of maturity of this space?
So it's a tough one.
Gotcha.
It's a tough one. No. So, there's different maturation points of a company also.
Yeah.
When I showed up, when I was actually going to be CISO somewhere, it was an area where, one of those, bigger vendors was already in place.
Right.
And when I looked around, I realized that was the one area I didn't need to focus on at first. And so I went and was able to sort of let them do their thing. And in the background, their company grew and things got a lot better.
Right.
But the reality is, how do you assess those places? Even when you actually get those third-party reviews and that sort of thing. When I was working at a big bank, I saw, they actually did that review. You look at the results, it doesn't look great for any of these places.
Right.
And that goes back to how many companies that started less than 10 years ago,
right?
Really have clean, mature everything when it comes to infrastructure and everything. And then crypto world, you get the even sort of uglier side of it, of that it's been, going up and going down so quickly that you've got an opportunity cost that's just simple business level.
Yeah. The volatility of the companies themselves, I imagine, like you get in bed with someone to do some particular function, and then the next downturn they're economically out of business, and now you've anchored your development and release process to this thing, and they're not there, and you got to rewicker your whole program now.
And there's a whole question that if you put yourself in their shoes, does it make sense to wait an extra 6 months to release your product, or just get it out sooner?
Yeah.
Even if it doesn't have all the security bells and whistles that you would have wanted, or programs behind it that it should have had.
Man, this sounds really hard.
Yes.
It sounds really hard.
And so what's happened with this whole ecosystem and world, though, is it's been a lot of that. And it's drawn a lot of people in the beginning. There were some folks that got rich really quickly. And then a lot of folks ended up getting hurt because things rushed in, and, it wasn't all done in good, solid ways.
Right.
And so InfoSec is a side of it, but, just pure business level, just fraud and things like that were happening all over the place, too.
Right.
And so when it's how do you secure it? Well, it's should they fix the fraud first? Should you fix InfoSec for it first? And really you need to fix all of it, but there needs to be an overall maturation across the entire board.
Yeah. It almost sounds like back to when we were paralleling, the the AI guardrails. Like if that level of money is coming through anything, we probably need to stop and think about both the operating model of it, the business controls that are put in it to minimize fraud, as well as the infosec, the CISO part of the thing.
Yes.
To make sure that like, okay, so we solve for the fraud just moves to the underpinning infrastructure or the poor app design or whatever. Fraud becomes not low-hanging fruit, but more advanced cyber attacks. But point being that that's how the kill chain would evolve, I would imagine.
And then, jump into a more basic side of it. When you're talking about, large amounts of crypto funds, in general, you're either custodying it with one of the small number of vendors that'll hold your funds.
Yeah.
Self-custodying, where you're dealing with your own keys and, your own processes and movements.
Yeah.
Or you've got money that's on exchanges. Because, a lot of these places, they don't just hold and move crypto in simple ways. They're trying to, be full-fledged financial institutions.
Yeah.
In a lot of ways. And so they're, you can trade with them. You can get derivatives. You can get all kinds of things going on there.
Yeah.
And so you may have bulk funds that are sitting there also.
Yeah.
And so you've got, a few different places and sorts of avenues of getting to those funds. And when you start talking about institutional levels, how much is too much for one person to be able to control?
Sure.
And what controls do you need? Because this isn't like, classic TradFi ops where, you stole the money by transferring it to your personal bank account and your personal bank account gets frozen.
Yeah.
There's even an area of this where, you don't necessarily even need to transfer the crypto. You just need to steal the keys.
Yeah.
And if no one knows you stole the keys, you got a copy of them or that sort of thing somehow, you disappear. Like, what do you need? There's nothing that moved. You just have a copy of it. And the keys, when you talk about private keys, you think of this as this long ugly string, but there's this concept of seed phrases. And so the actual private keys, it's not begin yada yada with all these gobbledygook characters that's tens or hundreds of lines long. It's really you can boil it down to like 24 words from a specialized dictionary.
Interesting.
And so maybe I can't memorize it, but someone, a little more capable.
The core library that sets the seed phrase for the keys is 24 natural language words to which could easily be memorized by someone that was good at memorizing things. And so talk about like easing there's a flaw in the library in complex passwords or complex key establishment. Wow.
Like you're activating Winter Soldier or something.
Just think of it as, somebody sees that and they have a photographic memory. Then, 5 years later, if you haven't moved to a new set of keys, they could just clear that out. And, a wallet might have $10 in it today, but, it's got 10 billion in it, a year from now.
Right. And why can't they rotate those keys regularly?
Oh, you can. But how often in InfoSec world do you
That's
see
right.
the PKI getting rotated?
But I was waiting for that one. I was waiting for that.
Oh,
I was about to throw you in front of a bus, but
a bus named Mike.
and then even related to that, there's a fun concept there of, it is good to go rotate things. But it comes down to also, it gets complicated. And the level of risk that you want to, approach and attack for that, you kind of have to go into tinfoil hat territory.
Yeah.
You can see the random stuff I'm throwing on LinkedIn. They're using AI to do acoustic side channel attacks, so you can figure out what you're typing when this is going on.
Right.
Like, I get paranoid.
Well, it's back to that meta point. Like all of this anchors into what is your key risk, and your key risk is you got $10 billion on a digital certificate, a digital asset that's X string long. Some of it can even be memorized. Like
yes.
That, like, and so because of that, somebody typing in those 24 characters or whatever that is, and that, like, if that's gone, and they have rightful access to our system, there went $10 billion.
Here's the other problem. Encryption is great; it's strong.
That asset concentration is a really powerful thing.
But yes, encryption is great and strong. But as soon as you have those keys and you have lots of funds, maybe it's not just one wallet. Maybe you have multiple wallets. Maybe you're sweeping. Maybe you're doing things that are a little more complex. Maybe you have a hot and cold wallet system where you're not putting too much in the hot wallet, so it's harder for things to go wrong.
Right.
You've probably heard this, again and again in encryption world: garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
How do you tell that system what to do with those keys and make sure it doesn't receive the wrong instruction?
Oh, sure. You got to have
and
a
inherently.
Like there's a quality control to the life cycle of how you're doing your wallet management and the encryption of it, and
exactly.
if you don't micromanage that, then you end up dumping bad data into the cold wallet.
And you can have well, it's not even just bad data, but let's say I intend to put, $10 million to a wallet over there.
Yeah.
If you manage to change that wallet address because I don't have the right process or existing systems in place,
yeah.
it just goes somewhere else.
Yeah,
that belongs to, one of those nation states.
So your operational software has to be managed with the same level of security as the money itself, because it literally is the traffic cop for how the money gets moved. So
that's where you get into those ecosystems where, it's not just, one place where you're signing something with a digital signature. Because ultimately that's what it boils down to. You have your private keys, you digitally sign an instruction. That's the way you prove that your ownership of it is intending to do that.
Yeah.
But you have on-chain capabilities to do multi-sig implementations where the actual smart contracts are saying, I need a minimum threshold of signatures from, something that you can configure. Something that way, you'll have 2 or 3 different or 4 or however many different independent places have to sign something in that contract before it actually releases it.
Wow.
And even that's gotten breached.
Wow.
Because even if you think you did something slick by setting that up, there's been places where, the signing capability was on a few employees' laptops.
Right.
And, they got one of those LinkedIn job interviews and they took it and something went wrong. The thirst trap, yeah. And it went wrong. And that sort of stuff does happen. Another area of it that's gotten a little more advanced, although there's been some recent news on it, is MPC, or multi-party computation, which you guys might have heard of.
Nope.
Or might not have. It's an area of cryptography that's been around for decades.
Yeah.
It's great. It involves, basically doing signing in multiple places and then mathematically combining it in a not, secure or not risky operation.
Okay.
So that way you'll have like multiple keys,
So it's like federated, what would that even be? Federated public key exchange kind of thing? Or well, never mind. We can go read up on that piece. How does it apply here?
It gives you the ability. It gives you just another even stronger way of being able to put more controls in place on it.
I see.
Some of the vendors are implementing things. The biggest one, Fireblocks, they've just cornered the market in this space.
Yeah.
That's what they use behind the scenes.
Yeah.
They also did a bunch of research recently and released, hey, we found a whole bunch of vulnerabilities in everybody else's implementation of it. Maybe not everybody, but multiple other places.
Right.
And so it's this constant paranoia and space race of is what you've done strong? Is it good enough?
Right.
And then when you're that close to the money actually moving, how much chance do you have to detect, respond, prevent, recover, that sort of thing?
Right.
Because you put that system in place, and once it moves, it moves.
Right.
You can't claw it back. You can't get it back. And
Right.
to go into that a little bit, things have gotten better. This is an area where those centralized exchanges, those are your on ramps and off ramps to getting those funds.
Yeah.
So ultimately, if I walked up to you and said, I have $1 billion worth of crypto, can you give me some cash?
Yeah.
You'd probably say, I don't know what to do with that.
Right.
Or you might know what to do with it, but you wouldn't know where you're able to exchange that and actually get the money and not get caught.
Right. Right.
Because, anything that's US based, well, it's not the same as a bank. They still are starting to catch up and, do some coordination with things like the FBI and law enforcement.
There's regulatory oversight and, cash exchange. Yeah.
And when you're doing that, you have to transfer the funds into one of their wallets. And as soon as you do that, there's the possibility they can freeze it.
Yeah.
That's turned into an interesting space race where folks like North Korea have even taken crypto, they've bridged it from one chain to another, that sort of thing. That goes into that whole area of mixers and how you can hide what you're doing.
Yeah.
Or is related to that. And then they've actually taken it and used it to do staking, which is, you take your cryptocurrency and you basically give it back for some amount of time and you earn the new coin that gets mined.
Interesting.
And it's one of those things when the coin is, marked as dirty, but the coin that just got mined isn't. It's one of those. I'm sure there's going to be more ways to do analysis and still keep track of that, or I'm hoping there are.
Right.
But you're seeing this space race of creativity that's just constantly happening.
Yeah.
And some of the places that are doing this, I like to think of the analogy as I go home at the end of the day, I make a drink, I relax, I go to bed, I sleep in an actual bed. The folks that are actually attacking this stuff, sometimes if they don't make anything that day, they don't get to eat.
Yeah.
It's like, desperation.
That's true in a lot of industries, unfortunately. But I totally get where do you think, state sponsored cyber attack came from?
or how creative do people get in prisons to make weapons?
Right.
That analogy comes into the crypto world because,
shiv you with a toothbrush, son.
And so that's the level of desperation and pushing that's actually going on there.
Because the opportunity's there. Again, if I can get access to that set of credentials, basically, I have opportunity for $12 billion. Stealing that from a billionaire, stealing that from a bank, the layers of difficulty are way different than what we're talking about.
Yes.
It's almost irresponsible that people allow that kind of money to get into that, and this is the level of risk they're assuming they don't even understand.
And when you think about risk that's taken, unconsciously or subconsciously, or things just sort of grow on their own, this is a great example of it, because if you go back, there was a certain threshold where there wasn't enough money in the crypto ecosystem for that to really matter. And at some point it grew past it. And it didn't mean everybody suddenly said, "Oh, great, let's just build the controls now."
Right.
Like it's
Right.
it's the classic what goes wrong and what happens with drift that happens, with all kinds of infosec risks.
Right. Yep. That's right.
Coming from the traditional fintech side, like how do you see things like open source research, auditing, pen testing inside the crypto space? People coming along? Is there a huge delta? Do you have really good shit that's out there that's helpful?
It's coming along. There's a small number of firms that are doing a lot of pushing, and there's also not enough of it. It's that thing of you talk about like the skills gap or the shortage that happens in overall infosec, and it's this world where that gap is happening. Everything just gets turned into that little world and amplified.
I've got millions to billions of cash, and I still am not going to spend money on security unless I'm regulated to do so, or I'm ripped off.
Yeah,
I mean, that's mind blowing. Mind blowing.
Yeah, and it's not to say nobody's trying or nobody's doing it right, but it's hard to do it. It takes a huge investment. The places where you see these really matured programs are the 1% that we were talking about before.
Yeah.
And if they want to do crypto, they'll tend to invest that heavily in it.
Yeah.
Everyone else, though, if you're talking about a company that's got under $1 billion of market cap, or maybe a little more than that, how much do they how much can they spend? How much should they spend? What's the opportunity cost of focusing on that? With the very volatile and short term growth.
Yeah.
And so it all factors into you got to work your butt off basically and do the absolute best you can across the entire thing.
It's just like, again, the risk model's so different. Like this isn't attack IQ software. This is an adversarial defensive software. So the traditional AppSec model doesn't apply. Like, you own digital assets worth potentially millions. Therefore, like, having no framework to anchor to around like kinds of security. This is the irresponsibility part. And like when we talk about the AI thing, why I just like it's maddening to me to watch how this stuff has flourished and people have lost their shirts and billionaires have been born, and so often that's happening because of this problem, and we're allowing it because we allow this thing to flourish without some form of regulatory body around it in a good way. And like, this makes me question what our national motives are. Are we just waiting for the banks to get their shit in place so they can capitalize on the whole thing and bring it under control, or what's the big picture here?
So my gut, there is going to be a piece of that happens over time, because banks are a lot more risk averse. And so they don't do the new thing first. They watch other people doing it, they see what happens, and then they go do it, but in a more careful, methodical type of a way.
Yep.
And that's not to say banks are perfect either. Like I was saying earlier, the whole thing was sort of birthed after a financial crisis.
All right.
It's don't trust the bank. Don't just let them do their thing.
Right.
But it's turning out that a lot of these problems also are getting solved by those centralized, big players coming back in different ways.
Right.
And getting more involved.
Right.
So it's that constant tug of war is fully decentralized, really good for things. One of the other fun parts of thinking through like the sort of setting the scene for like the early and mid 2000s before this actually came out, the rise of peer-to-peer. In 1995 there wasn't a lot of it, but yeah, Napster, LimeWire, all that stuff.
Yeah.
People loved peer-to-peer. We're jumping on it like crazy.
Yeah.
They love decentralized stuff.
Like NASA invented that for SETI, like doing the decentralized processing of space compute, so they could analyze the radio frequencies and stuff.
That's the idea.
You mean find aliens?
No, we just proved that we already knew they were here. They were probably deciphering their comms. Yeah. Let's be clear about what was actually happening, because we were spying on them.
Yeah, to what you were saying before, though, there is a shortage of vendors. There's actually, this is something I've talked about with some of my friends, there are a lot of really good ideas, but there's not a big enough customer base to actually build it and sell it to them.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things, some of them, you don't really need to sell it as a product. A company could just do it themselves, but it gets complicated. Yeah. If I wanted to do, honey potting with crypto, would you, if you're the CFO, would you let me just go buy, I don't know, 10 grand worth of Bitcoin.
Right.
Like, how do you write that off in your system? Like, how does all of that work? And then I'm going to intentionally go put it somewhere where it's more likely to be stolen than my actual bulk amount of it.
Right.
Which means that when that happens, I still have to go report it to law enforcement. I might have the Treasury saying, I funded North Korea. It's...
And in that scenario, too, you're big, and I know you probably want to talk about this, is insider threat anyway, right?
Yes.
So, like, you establish some level of internal honeypot to see if somebody from the outside can break in. The truth is, if you don't have good operational control, somebody on the inside will transfer that. I mean, that's what the Quadra... Why can't I remember
Quadriga
that?
CX.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's what the Quadra CX thing basically was.
Yeah, and this is one that's just different from the other worlds. I mean, there's a side of it that, taking crypto out of the equation, when you think about big companies, you hear all the time, maybe not all the time, but way too many times about, folks that are in power and don't have enough oversight of what they're doing, and they steal funds.
Yeah.
And so make it easier to steal it and move it. What do you think that is going to happen in terms of that motivation?
Yeah.
And when things jump and, sometimes they've, 5x or 10x overnight or that sort of thing. What happens if, you thought there was $1 million worth of funds in there and all of a sudden it's $50 million worth of funds in there? Do you still want to trust, that one person or even that team that's handling it, that's enough and that they're not going to collude together? Because the collusion, if you think about it, if you get a big enough amount of funds, what if you got 20 people that literally all said, we're just going to go steal this?
Right.
And there's a side of that. You steal funds.
Is the answer like access control the hell out of everything in multiple layers? Is it like multiple contracts to be able to get access? Is it surveil the hell out of everything and let people go? Like, what is the strategy for dealing with that?
Part of it is that age-old thing. Like, if you're building a PKI, who owns the keys to it?
Yeah.
Like, how do you think of the trust for that? And ultimately, at some point, you have to make some concessions about what that trust is.
Yeah.
When you get vendors for... Oh, sorry.
Well, I'm just thinking out loud here with you and interrupting your train of thought. So apologies. Is it also in like some level of distributed model of like how the keys for the crypto is actually held? So like one person doesn't get access to the whole thing, or is the model different?
So this is where I would love more standardization. I know it's
kind of whatever you come up with, I guess is what you're going to say.
I know I mentioned them before, but with Fireblocks, they have an entire transaction policy that you actually set where you have a cascading set of rules and, who can request, who can authorize, how many authorizations are needed.
Yeah.
And so what actually was, coming out of that was a lot of parallels to privileged access management and, good old dual key or two-person integrity or multi-person integrity.
Yeah.
And so part of that, is really just setting up those parallels, which you actually have in a lot of ops processes in general in TradFi. It's just, you got to do it even more intensely.
Yeah.
You got to be even more paranoid. And you have to, make sure those folks really understand that there's certain aspects of that you have to be more paranoid about. If you're going to go set up to do, a wire transfer, you independently do an out-of-band communication to double check that those numbers are correct about where it's going.
Right.
Okay, crypto world, it's not the exact same thing, but you still need to, take that same concept and apply it.
Right.
You can do that at some level technically, and then there's a side of that where soft controls, how much do you want to trust them?
Right.
And so you build this entire, world or ecosystem of process around, having enough checks and balances that you can be able to move things, but also not be able to move too much or too often or too quickly.
Right. Right.
And that also relates to sort of the cold and hot wallets, which is, if you guys aren't aware, a hot wallet is something that's actually actively connected to the internet.
Yeah.
A cold wallet is you're actually breaking and air gapping something to be able to actually do that digital signature.
The way I think about that when you said it was like how if I've been too drunk at the craps table and like they keep giving, you keep winning because you're on the pass line. About every third roll, I'll take a handful of chips and just put them in my pocket so I won't be inclined to use them. So that's my cold wallet down there, and I'll keep my hot wallet rolling on the pass line.
and where that gets tricky is you got to be diligent. And you have fluctuations in asset value also. So, if you thought X amount of Bitcoin or X amount of ETH or that sort of thing was good enough, you really have to translate that into what that means in your currency.
Yeah.
Because this isn't even, US dollars. If you're over in another country, it's, what are the fluctuations, currency wise too.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And so it's, that value, but eventually there is that threshold of, there's something that's too much. And, it needs careful watching, and careful watching has been tough in, that world for, a long time to be something that quickly matures is probably the way of thinking of it. Because banks had lots of troubles back in, 200, 300, 400 years ago.
Let me see if I got this right. So it's an incredibly new industry that's highly immature, built on top of an incredibly immature set of vendor communities and concepts that are frankly still being sorted out. It has an incredibly reliant security paradigm built on the infrastructure that's there. All of that stuff is residual. And then you have to overlay all of these special business and operational controls around how access and money or access and transactions take place that really haven't been thought through. And you're even putting on top of that new and different encryption models on top of that to help facilitate it, probably speed as well as stronger access federation and things like that. So all of it's new and immature, and you have to sit atop of all of that and make sure that with the stroke of a digital pen, you don't lose $10 billion or whatever is being exchanged. Like
Yes.
that's maddening, dude.
And it's knowing that folks know that you're associated with that, and they're not investing $10 million just on one company that but they're throwing the kitchen sink at you.
Yeah.
You're part of wherever they're setting up their list of where to spray and see what happens.
Yeah.
And so you're seeing some of that stuff. One of the things that happened actually more than a few times when I was sitting in the CISO spot was, looking at some of the phishing attacks that looked a little more creative and a little better. And then, fast forward a month or two and you see the write-up in a Security World News article.
Yeah.
And you look at it and you're like, yeah, this is the exact same technique.
Well,
this is
I wanted to ask about that. Like, one of the ways we survived in like kind of the birth and evolution of the traditional infrastructure cybersecurity industry was how we collaborated. Is there like a tight circle of crypto dudes like you that like share tippers, cues of like how to deal with these things or like here's a problem I don't know how to solve, or are you guys still very fractionalized and very insularly focused?
Or
is there just not enough of you? There's probably
there's not really enough to have a ton of ecosystems, but there's been more, and it's come a long way in the last 2-3 years.
Yeah.
That's probably
Sounds like it's time to start a crypto cyber conference in some
that's where my head was going.
faraway city.
He was talking about the Fireblocks guy, and I've heard, I know a little bit about those guys from previous experiences, and like, what's he doing? What's Michael doing? Why does he want to come down here? We'll do another run at crypto or something like that if he would be interested. Where's their conference?
I'm sure you'd have some great perspective on it. I don't know if he's done any conferences.
Well,
you
not
could definitely
conference.
try hitting him up at some point and see if he's interested.
Well, obviously share with him, look, if crypto is going to be around for a while, this is an area that I think people need to know about, especially if you're going to work in fintech. Like everywhere that you go, there's going to be a crypto unit. If not, crypto may become a big part of your responsibility. Frankly, this scares the hell out of me because I can barely keep up with my knowledge of how things work in a legacy-based way, and so. What you're describing, I conceptually get, but holy shit, that's a level of energy and commitment, and I just don't know how I would do it.
You want to know the other fun dimension of this you got to deal with also?
Yeah.
As much as there's the complaining about what happens on LinkedIn, the scamming everyday people.
Yeah, right.
It's completely insane.
Yeah.
And
oh my God,
there's just entire patterns around establish some kind of trust, convince them that you're associated with that crypto company, and then go get them to put money somewhere.
By the way,
it's the bait and switch.
This crypto thing is all about commoditizing to the masses, digital currency exchange, right? And so you're dealing with consumers, direct to consumer, people getting scammed and I can't get to my crypto,
or even if your business doesn't, you still have consumers reaching out saying hey, where's this money I put into your system? And
right.
You're like, that's not how the system works.
Right.
I don't know what you're talking about. I'm really sorry.
You've got the reputation risk of your name being dragged through the mud, even if it's erroneous. You've got your executive management getting called from their escalations to their presidents of people they know. And
I can tell you, I've seen copies of my picture on lots of other websites, offering services.
This guy stole my money.
Yeah, and they're pointing it off, because they're just trying. It's pretty easy to go buy a domain and put a website up these days. The domain costs what, $10, $20, and there's website software where you just point and click now.
We probably should reshoot this with a bag on your head.
My name is
Exactly.
Have a translator.
There you go.
Just put the shade up, that way we don't know who you are.
Knowing that you got all that going on, though, you're staring at crypto ecosystem world, but then it's also just enterprise maturation,
Yeah.
and it's hard, and you're actually getting attacked and targeted more.
Yeah.
Actually, one of the funny ones, we didn't really talk about ransomware that much, but the sort of pattern, at least that I've gotten the sense of, with crypto companies, is that the folks that are trying to actually do a more advanced attack on them, they're not trying to get in and shut everything down, because that blocks your access to the funds.
Right.
It just doesn't conceptually make sense to do that. But that means you got to worry about the low and slow attack.
Right.
They find a way to get in. They find to go. They're trying to go. Figure out how your controls work, what the systems are.
This is a sit and listen mission.
Yes,
Totally.
And so it's that paranoia of what happened 6 months ago, a year ago, that could be listening still.
Right.
How do I catch that? How much do I have to worry about that still sitting there?
Can you imagine psychologically what that, like, you have a breach, right? You find like I don't know, man, burn it all down, like everything's dead, right? Like start over, like this, like, because you can never trust, right? And if it's so easy in terms of like the risk model that you put in place is like, only with a couple of digital certs I could have access to all this money. Like, can you ever prove that you're not going to have that problem again?
Yeah, and it's that fun thing. If someone steals your keys, how do you know when they stole them?
Oh, so I guess the end point of like the risk model I was building and the immaturity is that, oh, by the way, if you're breached, you might as well start over.
Yeah. It's the burn it down and do it over again if you really want to do it properly.
There's a spider in the car. Burn it down.
So it's a fun challenge, and it's a terrifying challenge, and it's a difficult one.
Let's talk about you. What motivates you to do that? Like, is there a big end state for that for you? You're going to make $1 billion out of this thing, or like it's just cool, or like why are you into it?
I'm going to be a billionaire, but no, there's a side of this that. So when I first made the choice to jump into it, I knew it was going to sort of be a novel area with more attacks, more nonsense to deal with, but also this new technology to go learn.
Yeah.
And why sit there and like muddle around and stuff that's old?
Why chase known vulnerabilities in Microsoft every day, like we talked about today?
I'd already done enough of that.
Right.
And so it's that idea of get in there with something new, just get to take part in it. And part of it was kind of coming to that realization of it needs a lot of help. And when things do go wrong, it's really going wrong.
Yeah.
North Korean nuclear programs are getting funded with this. They're committing human rights violations. They're getting that funding partially through ripping off crypto companies and people with crypto.
Yeah.
And so getting a chance to do that, I feel like it made a little more of a difference than what I was doing for the rest of finance.
Yeah.
And so, well, there's like other personal reasons and that sort of thing, and believing in crypto and blockchain, I feel like I am helping protect the world a little bit more.
Yeah, that's cool.
And so getting a chance to, at least like point in time, have done that.
Especially in a way that we're abusing it in such a terrible way, right? Like somebody's got to jump in front of that bus. So
exactly. And then for me, setting the scene for it, it was just the right timing for career-wise to be able to take a risk.
Yeah.
If you haven't been a CISO before, it's a lot easier to walk into something, and if it doesn't work out, okay, fine.
Yeah.
I took a shot at it. I got some lessons learned. Maybe next time it'll go better.
Yeah.
What ended up happening, not that nothing can go wrong at any time, but so far, so good. It's a clean company with a good reputation at this point. And, it takes a lot to have that happen and get sustained after you leave.
Right.
So there's, a lot of pride in that happening there, and, getting to take, a lot of that skill set and push it onto some other organizations too. It just made it even more fun.
That's cool. Well, what are you doing now? What are you up to?
Right now, I am looking for the next thing.
Cool.
And
doing some advisory stuff and things like that.
Yeah, starting to get into some advisory stuff. Thinking about possibly going that way. There's that fun topic of the fractional CISOs.
Yeah.
And you hear it. It's the whininess of, the organization isn't going to listen to me anyway, so why do I want to spend all my time trying to convince them of that stuff when I can tell them what to do and go to the next place to do the same thing?
Yeah.
Crypto world, if I want to do it there, it's also the risk of, will that crypto company exist a year from now?
Yeah.
So like you're doubling down on the risk that you're putting your name on. And so fractionalizing gives you a little more of a cushion that you're not just depending on one place, and it's not your entire name and reputation on that place too.
Yeah. They always, I don't know, I think it's a waste of time. I think it's like, I know I've got a frac opportunity I talk to, and they're like, jump in here and help me plan for next year. And I'm like, why? Like, whoever comes in is going to throw my plan away and put out a piece of paper and do the thing. Like, I think that's crazy. I think you should just wing it. It doesn't matter. Whoever comes in is going to do it. I don't know. I'm not a huge believer in that.
So the part of it that I
for
actually
crypto,
see,
I could totally get it because the volatility of the organization. I'm like, shit, we might not even be here in a month. So
and it's also because with crypto companies, there are a few places that have 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 people are trying to get a full-time CISO or a full-time security person.
Right, they're not big enough for an engineering team.
Exactly. But they still need the guidance. They need to know where to start tailoring and gearing things towards to be able to do it properly later, at least.
You should be like codifying the shit you're talking about, and then like be like the crypto CISO, crypto security coach. And you come in and like you lay down the 15 to 20 principles of like, here are the key things you need to be watchful for. Like, let me put you on the spot, give you a fun one. Like, you got it. Hey, I'm crypto company. Like, we've never thought about security. I think we're dumb. Like, give me the top 3 things that you would do tomorrow to like give me confidence that I'm not totally hosed here. Like
So, some of these things you're gonna laugh at.
you patch your shit.
It's basic controls, basic controls. Because when you talk to a 20-person company, they don't have an internal network even.
Yeah.
You know, and they're you know the way they're securing assets in the cloud or that sort of thing. Like the connectivity is just sketchy. You know, like home IP addresses are whitelisted or that sort of thing.
Right.
And so it's like there's a whole bunch of those where basic hygiene needs to just get cleaned up and fixed properly. And when you're only talking about a 20, 30-person company,
You can do that overnight.
you can do it quickly, and the vendors aren't that expensive.
Yeah.
I mean, I know like the single person headcount cost for those products is higher when you're smaller.
Yeah.
But it's also there's not that many people, so they're not charging you an arm and a leg for that stuff.
Right.
And so let's get it into place. It also gets you ready to scale up. And so that was a big part of what I was doing when I actually was in the seat, is that I was trying to put as many of these things into place in even just a semi-matured way, so that way, if and when they expanded, and they did it way faster than I was expecting, you know, those tools were already in place. And it was no, we're folding you in. This is my control stack. This is how it's working.
Yeah.
And, you know, a lot of those, you know, you look at it and you'll say, well, those are just basics, but it's how quickly could you do it? And how quickly could you shoehorn that into an organization that wasn't always ready to do everything, or wasn't,
Yeah.
they were already working overtime. Like, you're adding one more thing to that pile of what they have to deal with.
Yeah.
But it's that push. So that's one of them. The other one is, your keys and your process related to whatever you're doing with crypto.
Yeah.
And you can bucket that with like insider threat management and that sort of thing, but have some sort of a plan, understand what's going to go on. If possible, have some threshold if it scales.
Really deep key management, key visualization, key operationalization, like,
Because it's
you
easy
know
to
that
grow.
shit end to end.
Yeah,
Like,
and
right?
it's easy to grow, and then you have too much money with something that you're not comfortable with.
Yeah.
And so have a plan for that. And then the third area actually is, I hate to say it, but one of the, I guess the third and fourth area, your privileged access management. The keys to the rest of everything.
Yeah.
Because if you're using your work devices to interact with things, who owns the certificate management of that?
Right.
Who has the admin credentials?
Right.
Where's that actually going? How's that working? If you have a handle on that, it's that old Gary Thomas
There
thing,
it is.
and
Like-
you've got a better handle on what's going on there.
Yeah.
And a lot of places, you're starting from the early days and have to clean up.
Yeah.
The one last one, it's the awareness, the personal training, that sort of thing. How many people take a work laptop home and then put it on their home network, and it's not the guest network at their house?
Wow. Yeah. Totally.
Think about that.
The 20-person company.
It's on a network, and
these
your
companies
personal
start off
devices.
home networks in many ways, So yeah.
And so even if I go and I put some fancy EDR on there, I start monitoring the crap out of it. I push it through a proxy. I've got, like I start actually putting real layers of enterprise defense on these devices.
Yeah.
If you've got it on the same network as, your personal honeypot, like how do I really protect that?
Yeah.
Because the thing's getting hammered on from, the next computer sitting on the table right next to it.
Totally.
And so there's a whole side of that folks, they sort of get and they sort of understand, but it's hard. And this goes back to that thing your friend was talking about. How do you help the masses? How do you help individuals even?
Yeah.
And it's tough, but things like use a password manager and actually use good two-factor.
That almost feels like number one to me. Like, you start at the human level and like basic operational hygiene, and how do you use a computer safely? And then you
Yes.
move to like enterprise, traditional small scale enterprise controls of going to have antivirus. We're going to, not have local admin unless checked out and managed. Then you get into like the key management principles of, the actual crypto process and stuff like that. But how reasonable is that? Like, as a way to approach, you just literally riffed probably one of the better frameworks I've not been able to find in this space. And so like that, back to your fractional opportunities or whatever it would be, like, find a way to quantify, build products on that, and then you're
Absolutely.
off to the races.
part of the challenge is actually doing it too, though, because when you put those basic controls
Well, you're
in,
the consultant. This is what you do, not how you do,
exactly,
my friend.
So the consultant gets to coach them on how to deal with when you light things up, and then you see a lot of weird things.
Yeah, that's right.
Because it's also a crypto company. You may have someone, running a Bitcoin node or, running Tor for something that's actually a requirement technically for something.
Right.
And you have to figure out, like, what's okay and how much connectivity should that have to things.
Yeah.
Can you build that in a zero trust model where it actually is isolated?
Well, the people that are going to be
those...
the people that are going to you're going to hire into this too, especially given again back to the immaturity of the profession. As a good friend of mine who was in a very high place, just be careful, leave it at that. Called them crypto crooks. Like people that work in crypto, or often have this, like they're hackers by trade in some ways, or something like that. So the nature of what they're going to be doing in a 20-person company working hard on a crypto project, they're going to have other side hustles. They're going to be doing other stuff. And like, you're going to have to find a way to teach them to carve off the work to protect the IP or the access that could be born from the other shit that they do. And that's probably the hardest job. You're talking about changing the culture of people that are very culturally bound to the way they do the things they do.
So here's the fun one. That 20-person company,
Yeah.
you won't have that boundary that stops you from working on a personal device and connecting to systems,
not.
pulling down code, all that stuff.
Of course not.
At some point, I have to come along and say that can't happen anymore.
Right.
And that person, they know that there aren't, I mean, I guess now is a little different from like 4 or 5 years ago, but there aren't that many developers that are either interested in this, have the skills in it. It's, one of those sides of it. They know that they're, a valuable commodity in some ways, and that their time is very valuable.
Yeah.
And so it makes it even more of a hurdle to overcome to actually get them to do those things in a safer way.
Yeah.
And you've got some of those folks came up, not through traditional finance, but just, people off to the side, doing their own thing with technology in general. They're getting into crypto too. And when you start doing things like tell them, hey, here's the certificate from the proxy.
Yeah.
Like you're going to run into SSL issues if you're not using the browser and you're connecting to the internet.
Said differently, these are people that probably haven't even worked in traditional enterprises.
Exactly.
And so they have no idea what you're talking about.
And they stare at you like you're crazy. And then you have to, help them through some of these things that are obnoxious that, traditional finance folks are just like, oh yeah, I have to rotate that. Oh yeah, here's how you actually deal with, connectivity. Here's how you deal with things in an enterprise environment.
Yeah.
And then you go into that topic of like SSDLC, and it's, with those folks, it's even more painful.
Yeah.
Because they haven't seen that, 10 times over everywhere else. They have to deal with it in a fresh way.
Yeah.
Sometimes you get new perspectives. Sometimes you get creative ideas and that sort of thing, because some of those folks are really crafty. But at the same time, they're also going to stare at you like you're slowing them down, because in some ways you run out of those things that are invisible pretty quickly that, and need to switch to those other ones.
Right. Well, E, I don't know how you do it, man. We'll bring you back, figure out what we want to do next for round 2, crypto 2.0 or something like that. But I guess for our listeners, like E's shopping for work. So if anybody needs any help doing crypto security, he's probably one of the few people out on LinkedIn that actually have real operational bona fides in doing it. So big plug for you there. Thanks for coming out and supporting us. It's great to see you again. Great to see you thriving. And damn, what you do scares the hell out of me. So, if I ever end up in a place where I need your help, I'm glad I got you in my back pocket to help me out. It's really cool to see you doing what you're doing.
Appreciate it.
Yeah.
Really appreciate the time today, man.
Do you have any other parting shots for our listening community today on like crypto security, like buy, sell, like who's moving, shaking, and be careful. Don't put yourself in a bad spot either.
I'll avoid that one. Another topic maybe we can talk about at some point is, ransomware has been around for decades.
Yeah.
Crypto made it possible and practical. So the downsides is a whole other topic we can talk about.
That's awesome. I totally get it.